you've heard me speak before, you know what a fan I am of the book of Mark. I like that fast pace, the actions of Christ, what's going on. It makes it really simple. Whenever I read the particular passage that I've chosen this morning in Mark, it reminds me of a movie that some of you may have seen called Good Will Hunting. It's an Oscar award-winning film, particularly in its cinematography because of the powerful scenes that go forth. And some of them are very moving scenes. Sean McGuire is a counselor who's played by Robin Williams, has been working with Will Hunting, a young math genius who is played by Matt Damon in the movie. Will has been sentenced to court-required therapy. Maybe some of you can relate to that. Over the course of the movie, these two begin to develop a very close friendship. To the point where they can actually begin to push and challenge each other as friends, not therapist to patient, but as friends. In one of their final scenes together, they're standing in Sean's office. They're several feet apart, but almost toe to toe, if that helps with painting a picture. They're kind of bantering as they're going through this. And in that final scene, they both reveal that they are victims of child abuse. Both had drunken fathers that would stumble up the stairs at night and use these children as punching bags. Sean says the interesting nights were when Dad would wear his rings. But then standing there in this vulnerable, quiet moment after Dad would wear his rings, you're just wondering what's going to happen. All of a sudden, Sean takes this first step towards Will. And he says, "Hey, Will, it's not your fault." And then, Will kind of gives him that puzzling look. And he says, "Yeah, I know." And then he steps a little bit closer. And he looks at him and he says, "No, you don't. It's not your fault." And then they do this back and forth until the 10th time. And then he's right in front of Will's face, nose to nose. And he says, "It's not your fault." And Will collapses into Sean's arms with tears and cries of a broken soul. Will Hunting, an abused child, could not hear them. He could not hear the words of his friend Sean. His life history had plugged his ears with messages of guilt, shame, and worthlessness. It was like he was deaf. It took 10 times of hearing the same message before it broke through and sunk in deeply into his soul and to begin to bring forth a new life as he recognized it. And the men standing around Jesus were astounded, and said, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear." This message this morning that Steve shared with us, it's an important story because, frankly, the way it reads, particularly in King James, Jesus isn't very nice in it, and many of us who aren't too comfortable with that. So too often, this story overshadows the second part of the story, the healing of the deaf man. The second story is a pretty simple one, right? A group of men bring to Jesus a man and beg him to heal him. He couldn't hear and he couldn't speak. So Jesus kind of pulls the man aside in private, and he sticks his fingers in the man's ears, and then he spits and touches the man's tongue. And finally he gazes heavenward, and he breathes out loud, "Be open." And I'm not going to try and pronounce the word that Steve did in the scripture. I believe his pronunciation. But he just breathes that word at the top. And man, immediately, this guy is unplugged, and he can speak, and a new life begins. And the people standing around Jesus are astounded, and he said, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf hear." It's only 7 verses. It's only 7 verses. But this is not a story that stands by itself. See, it's a story that's tacked on the end of that first familiar story. You can't take them separately. See, they're companion stories, and when they're held together, you might even say one just might be the key that unlocks the other. In the first story, Jesus has arrived into Gentile territory. Remember who the Gentiles are. That's us. That's us. Right? It's like he's gone on vacation almost, or a small sabbatical. He's entered a house in order to escape the crowds and to basically be incognito and hide out. He doesn't want to preach. He doesn't want to teach. And he's not there to heal. He's on vacation. But even Jesus can't keep his presence secret, and he is found out. He is discovered. A Syrophoenician woman, a Gentile, immediately goes after Jesus, and then she falls at his feet. This is kind of interesting. By entering this house where Jesus is, she's violated a lot of boundaries and parameters. Number one, gender boundaries, right? Man and woman just can't be face to face like that. Religious boundaries. A Jew cannot be with a Gentile. Men and women are not allowed to talk to each other in the way that she's talking to Jesus. And yet, here rests this woman at the feet of Jesus, risking consequences of breaking these boundaries, that so she can beg this man Jesus to remove demons from her daughter's body. And Jesus says, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Not only does Jesus say no to this woman and her daughter, but he calls her a dog, seemingly to belittle her. He says his ministry belongs to the children of Israel, and that it would not be fair to give it to the Gentiles, the dogs. That bothered me. I don't often think of Jesus as not being nice. So I dug out a bunch of books that I rarely dig out anymore. And I started looking, and when I got to this translation of dogs, because when I read that and I see dogs, I think of a pack of wolves, right? Mean big dogs. The word that he uses for dogs in the translations that you work back is kind of like one of my Yorkshire Terriers. He's kind of referring to pets. He's not talking about mean, angry, wild dogs that would roam the woods and ravish the land and the people that happen that. If I could have been there, you got to remember, John Lett might have been there, but I'm not that old. That in that, what he basically says when she comes back is, "Good answer." Right? Now, King James, it reads a little different, but that's kind of the spirit of where he is with this. So you're going to hear me use some almost here in just a minute, but see, it's that caring and gentle Jesus that renews these evil spirits, stilled storms, and fed 5,000 people. And the way it reads, it makes you think, what happened to him? He's so rude. It's almost that he doesn't even care that his daughter is sick. It's almost as even he's not listening. It's almost that he's deaf to her words. But this woman won't budge. Yes, even the dogs under the table get some scraps. And suddenly the whole world shifts with that great answer. It's like Jesus' ears are unplugged. And even his understanding of who is worthy to the kingdom of God was challenged and changed. Now, we know why, because we read the whole book, right? This is as it's unfolding. And remember, Mark presents us these series of action stories. Mark has more action stories and miracles than it does Jesus' sermons. So we're kind of watching this in a fast-forward motion here. And when you get this impression, that the world shifts, it's that lesson metaphorically that Christ is here for the Gentile as much as the Jew. That's us. That's us early on. I mean, can you see this? Right? Jesus heals a deaf man almost because Jesus is a deaf man at that point, working with the children of Israel. deaf to the cries of the desperate mothers. It's because of her, because of these people crying, that he becomes different. He unplugs the man's ears because he knows that healing can come from having your ears open to the voices you have shut out. This woman's daughter, was not the only person healed that day. Jesus' ministry was healed to completion. And you're saying, Paul, what are you talking about? I'm saying that now we are open, that the Gentile is equal to the Jew with Jesus. The Gentile is equal to the Jew with Jesus. All because this mother helped unplug his ears. And so then goes around the unplugging of the ears of others. And that's just the beginning. I mean, it's like a snowball down the side of the hill. This thing just gets bigger and bigger. Right? The boundaries all but evaporate with Jesus. Jesus heals her daughter. And then he cures the Gentile deaf and mute man. Then he goes out and feeds 4,000 people that had previously been seen as dogs. Jesus' ears were open and the kingdom of God was stretched wider when the hearing was restored. When ears are open, the voices that have been shut out, healing happens. See, Will Hunting couldn't hear. But along comes someone who would not be dismissed. Sean persists until Will's ears are unplugged and open. And finally, he hears these words of pure gospel. It's not your fault. A few years ago, I completed a book study called Seeing a Gray World of Black and White. It's one of Adam Hamilton's books, if you're familiar with Mr. Hamilton. And what I was working on then was trying to have my ears open to other people and what Jesus was saying to me. It's one of those kind of introspective studies that works on you a lot. In this study, we're trying to hear the words and concerns of those who believe differently than ourselves. I was teaching Lay Academy yesterday, and one of the things I shared with the students when we were discussing prayer is one of my greatest struggles is praying for my enemies. I still struggle with that. So, let's just kind of be factual about this and the concept of how King James presented this story and be honest that if Jesus in this story can appear to get it wrong, and we know he wasn't wrong, I'm not saying he was, but if that appearance is there because of his answer before it gets clarified, Lord knows we can't do it. Lord knows we can't do it. Some congregations have heard about this book that I just mentioned to you. And I've had people say we can never do that in our church. It's too risky. It might tear us apart. You know what? They're right. It is risky. It is risky. It's not the risk of the possibility of it bringing conflict that scares them. Right? Conflict doesn't have to be bad. I think the risk that scares the soup out of most people is the possibility of being changed. As Christ transforms us, the possibility of being changed. See, the risk is that possibility of walking away somehow different than when you walked in. Perhaps with bigger ears and a bigger heart. And a bigger heart. Too often we're told that messages about ourselves seek to limit God's love for people of the world. Sometimes we're told that God's love is too specialized and too specific, that it can never include someone like us because of the things we've done or the way we treat people or the way we've lived our lives up to them. But at other times we view ourselves as a worthy one, right? And we have everything together. And thus like to point fingers at those to watch out. We call them holier than thou liars. Man, these messages are designed to unplug our ears. You got to unplug your ears. But the good news is that God is at work unplugging ears to hear the voices we have stopped listening to. He's never tired of listening to the voice. And he never does not have a chance to listen. For some, like Will Hunting perhaps, it's a long-awaited voice. It's that affirmation of love that you finally hear in your life when you open your ears to hear this. Others, like for Jesus, it could be a voice of disruption, challenging the ways that you have always always thought to be true. Whatever it is, you can be sure that when hearing is restored, healing is not far behind. Church, God's love is very, very, very big and very, very, very wide. Big enough for you, big enough for me, big enough for the world. The question I have for you today is, can you hear it? Can you hear it? And the men standing around Jesus were astounded and said, he has done everything well. He makes the deaf